Hello everyone, my name is Jwalin Chaudhari and I welcome you all to the third technical session of this conference. The speaker in this session is Professor Purushottama Bilimoria. He's a professor of philosophy and comparative studies at Deakin University in Australia and senior research fellow in the University of Melbourne. He is a visiting professor and lecturer at University of California, Berkeley and Dominican University, San Anselmo, and Shivadasani Fellow of Oxford University. His areas of specialist research and publication covers classical Indian philosophy and comparative ethics, continental thought, cross-cultural philosophy of religion, diaspora studies, bioethics, and personal law in India. He is an editor-in-chief of Sophia Journal of Philosophy of Religion Springer. He also works on political philosophy pertaining to ethics of right, theories of justice, capabilities, education, and gender issues in third world, particularly South Asian context. The chair in this session is Dr. Aleksandr Andreas Wansbrough. He teaches film, media, and art theory and history at the University of Sydney and AURO University, Seoul, India. Now we may proceed with this session. So you may begin with your speech.
Who, me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I thank Professor Om Trivedi for inviting me to this very timely and thoughtful conference. I will. So this as you can see from the title, it's an idea of perhaps radicalizing economics at a time when there's a lot of economic challenges. I think it's time for us to rethink how we go about economics. This was, it's been a series of thoughts that I've been having for some time now. I'll just read my paper. I think that will be the best in the time that we have. And perhaps the chair could alert me 2 minutes before the time is up so that I can summarize. So in this brief talk, I was to problematize the relationship between economics and moral challenges we're facing in the aftermath of the outbreak of the, as I call it, corona virus global pandemic. My case will be argued through a critique of the models, those that have worked and those that have not, or are on the road to extinction. Inevitably, the analytical discussion of economic models that the economists are so enamored of in their works will be interspersed with narratives of case studies I present, much in the spirit of narrative ethics, to which economists such as Amartya Sen, Partha Das Gupta, Pranab Pradhan, who's a colleague at UC Berkeley, make frequent recourse in their own studies, especially of non-Western scenarios. I begin my inquiry with ancient Arthashastra corpus, with some reference to Buddhist governance practices, notably those of Ashoka, and an economic system balanced against the imperatives of welfare and just and fair treatment of citizens in all aspects of their lives, needs, and entitlements, and some recent rethinking on how wealth and well-being are measured, as well as some Indian constitutional directives on economic rights. I'm looking for resourcefulness, various resources of thinking about economics in consonance with moral and spiritual enlightenment, rather than purely in terms of that mainstay of modernity, instrumental reason or rationalism. The latter, it may be argued, turns into economic rationalism, the unrestricted market economy that involves foreign investment strategies, global free trade, trade-offs between supply and demand, control over export, import, tariff barriers and protectionism, payment of national debts, and defaulting on excessive borrowing, profit-driven enterprise and entrepreneurship, strategies of power over capital, the unsavory pressure of corporatism, even globalism in universalization of avarice, all of which manifest as commodity fetishism or commodification in a capitalist consumer mentality that Das Gupta calls the tyranny of free market. India's recent re-emergence into the global economy, and even before that, the success in both economic and technological terms of the 3 million strong Indian diaspora has caused the global pundits to sit up and look afresh at the rhetoric about India's long history of poverty and inability to rise to the economic standards of the West. Read capitalist economy, as Karl Marx and Max Weber indeed lamented. It was in consonance with this widely held thesis that James Mill and John Mills sought to help alleviate the pre-civilizational feudalism afflicting the Indian populace by prescribing Benthamitean utilitarianism via the machinations of colonial East India Company. 100 years later, liberalization happened, and that changed India's economic direction once again. Little attention, however, is paid to the extent to which, quote, the cultural imaginings of India's spiritual values, unquote, are linked to this renaissance. By India's spiritual, I do not mean only Hindu. Rather, I wish this term inclusively to underscore equally Jain, Buddhist, Parsi, Christian, Muslim, Sikh, Gandhian, and quasi-secularist forests that have contributed to, if you will, the gross economic wisdom, GEW, of the subcontinent, which is comparable to Bhutan government's index of GNH, gross national happiness. The recently deceased Guru Sri Satya Sai Baba, a towering, though controversial by modern standards, figure, drew on the immense wealth of the Indian diaspora, members of the business and middle class within India and Sri Lanka, and international philanthropists to fund an array of good works, among them all free super specialty hospitals, clinics, and hospices, water harvesting, rural distribution plants, and schools and colleges. Sai Baba's organizations have helped build and operate such social service facilities in poverty-stricken regions to the tune of an estimated $10 billion, supplemented with a lot of volunteer labor and donated time. In India alone, there are some 13,000 institutes thus supported, and the Indian model is emulated with human value curricula across 136 countries. The head monk of Sera Tibetan Buddhist monastery near Mysore, the Venerable Guimat Khensu Rinpoche Lobsang Jampa, in an neology compared Sai Baba's enterprising work with that of Emperor Ashoka's state-managed, almost Fabian-style welfare system. And of course, the hospitals are working very arduously at the moment in trying to contain the virus. What this demonstrates perhaps is the implementation of bhakti, in other words, devotional style caring for the other ethos, with the utilization of trust, trusteeship, and dedication. Trust is an undervalued moral good, which Gandhiji also emphasized, that grows with use and conversely decays with the disuse, with its disuse or abuse. This approach to welfare and well-being harks back to the organic model of the society prevalent in traditional India, with its emphasis on trust, compassion, hospitality, and sensitivity to the distress of others, along with a host of personal and social virtues. As I said, Mahatma Gandhi raised this ideal to a practical institutional level and called it Sarvodaya. And this heuristically serves as the analog to the Heideggerian principle of Sorg, care, writ large. In this model, the virtue of thrift is active and in place of, as a corrective to instrumental reason or self-conforming rational beliefs, as Dasgupta put it, or rationalization in the Weberian sense, as the basis of normative universality of Western modernity. There is the differentiation of different spheres of life, the rise of capitalism, liberal democracy, and the nation state. In looking for new spiritual incentives to help modernize India's economy, Milton Singer commented, quote, in the indigenous materialism, as well as in the philosophy of renunciation, interpreted by Gandhi as a disciple of action in the service of others, and in their quest for spiritual salvation under the guidance of gurus who have already achieved self-realization, may reside the psychological and moral motive forces needed for a democratic and non-violent industrial development of India, end quote. The current rather cliched elephantine gargantuan Indian rate of economic growth belies some of that prediction as well as real-term indolence. The changes, however, have a broader compass and ramification. Consider what brought about the huge shift in the Gupta period, 350 to 550 CE, that spontaneously propelled a new religious ideology that almost overturned the Brahminic hegemony. Buddhist historians have argued that rapid urbanization and state formation stabilized society such that the middle, merchant, and agricultural classes sought to reconcile the Brahminic quasi-materialistic pressure with the inwardly unsustainable deeper sense of lack. The ascetic, otherworldly calling of Jain and Shramanic, yoga-steeped monks, both held out their temptations. There emerged not just the Buddha, but a new hermeneutic of Dharma. the principle that names the universal law, and the normative ethics that sustains social order that no longer required meticulous observation of sacrifices and rituals and dedications of offerings to the gods or their earthly patrons, the Brahmins. What emerged rather is a code of moral conduct and a business mercantile ethic that straddled the two tempting and tempestuous world possibilities. The economy of late Gupta period thrived in ways it never had before. By the time of Emperor Ashoka, a Gupta warrior king turned benevolent sovereign, the spiritual edge of the Dharma teachings had been eclipsed by the end game of the hugely urbanized economy. Ashoka set about rectifying the situation by re-injecting spiritual vision into the larger structural organization of society, paying keen attention to the welfare and well-being of every citizen. The reason that Buddhism found greater success for the egalitarian economic template outside India than within was probably the same reason Gandhi had expressed the hope that his teachings of nonviolence, Swadeshi, self-reliance, and satyagraha would find speedier realization and application outside than within the caste and priestly hierarchized society that India had become. But consider the Jains who hail from non-Brahminic forest-dwelling ascetic tradition and from whom Gandhi drew various of his insights. As bunny as business clans, Jains were the most successful commercial conglomerate in the subcontinent until the arrival of Persian Parsis and European traders who were initially dependent on the goodwill of the Jains and with whom they had to liaise and compete. While the Jains lost their commercial prominence in the subcontinents, they have remained successful in other British colonies where they followed Indian indentured laborers and have been no less successful in the diaspora. After missionaries left the subcontinent, Jains built and ran large numbers of subsidized hospitals and colleges all across India. Such altruism surely stems not from an ascetic disposition, but from engagement with the community as fellow sufferers and seekers. The Sikhs have not been far behind in this regard. In the 1980s, they spearheaded the Green Revolution with an intensely socially engaged reform initiative platform. This initiative lasted until Indira Gandhi, desirous of a larger federal share of the Punjab success story, intruded in Sikh affairs. The resultant havoc which cost Indira Gandhi her life delayed nationwide economic reform, towards which the country's best economic advisors were subtly guiding the Nehru dynasty. So it is urgent in the light of COVID-19 injected upheaval to pause and focus on the link between ethically cogent economic growth and religious cultural factors. First, think of the Buddhist Shintoist management style pursued more recently by Japan and South Korea as part of the East Asian emerging economies. The Buddhist ideal for practical economics begins with the recognition of the centrality of family values and interdependent social ethics. Both Pali and Mahayana texts stress that several interrelated, interactive, and interdependent aspects of living, singly and collectively, demand that its stakeholders strictly adhere to the ethical and moral norms laid down by the Buddha if they are to achieve the expected material well-being and moral happiness while winning as lay people both this world and the next world. To the Buddhist Shinto model, we may add indigenous confusion management ethos pursued in East Asian countries such as the republics of China, especially Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, and some other emerging Southeast Asian nations like Thailand and Laos. And second, as Arvind Sharma has shown certain economic virtues are inherent in Hinduism as an operational system. I quote here from an important reportage by a fellow Australian, Thomas Birchnell, quote, "Business excellence enshrined in Vedic Hindu philosophy by Sharma and Balveer Terwal develops a counterpoint to the popular Japanese interpretation of Demick's model of total quality management, envisioning the concepts of karma and swadharma as equivalent to modern quality indicators such as those proposed by the ICO 9000 and models specifically adopted by Indian corporations such as the US Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award and Singapore Quality Award. These models arguably come with a similar philosophy to ancient Vedic scriptures and map a possible model for future companies' adoption of these strategies. The authors variously canvass the possibility of Vedic practices as an approach to corporate social responsibility." End quote. There have been few bold thinkers who have delved into moral and legal texts, as well as exemplary teachings of contemporary social reform leaders such as Vivekananda, Vidyasagar, Ramabai, Tagore, Sri Aurobindo, Vinoba Bhave, the Dalai Lama, and Samdong Rinpoche in order to distill ideas into what the Kolkata-based theorist S.K. Chakrabarty has dubbed spirinomics, like spiritual economics, the shorthand for spirituality and economics, spirinoeconomics. This is a messianic scheme, but rather timely, and is making the rounds, at least in India's management and business arenas. However, what is lacking is a decisive set of projects and policies at the micro and macro levels that would successfully foster and nurture these values and prevent commercially driven exploitation of the traditional arts like Vedanta and Ayurveda, from Devaram to Chipak Dopra. It may not change economics beyond some attitudinal adjustments on the management and operational front. So despite these jingoism and so forth, we can go back to look at the Purusha Arthas, the four kingdom of ends: Artha, Dharma, Kama, and Moksha. These desires and motivations for action, individual and social, are intended to coordinate, harmonize, serve, and reconfigure one another as necessary to a community of spiritual and secular pursuits. One can see that elements of capabilities are embedded in the model, which echo in Amartya Sen and after him, Martha Nussbaum's schemata of capabilities in human development. In the Artha Shastra, Dharma and Moksha are trumped by, Dharma and Moksha are trumped by Artha and Kama. The Dharma Shastras hegemonize Dharma, albeit as a sovereign rule of the rod, while classical Vedanta errs excessively on the side of moksha. A modified model offered by the late philosopher Daya Krishna accords with Enlightenment predilection and an Indian constitutional mandate, something that underwrites economic rights with respect to material accomplishments and the right to decent livelihood, among other entitlements, in any charter of fundamental rights or Bill of Rights, for example, the articles on various individual, cultural, moral, religious, health, and educational rights, as well as citizens' fundamental rights, which are written into the Indian Constitution's fundamental rights. And so that have been expanded upon so that economic and health rights are included in much robust ways. Okay, so I think in terms of time, let me just go on. As Gandhi stressed, economics is untrue, which disregards moral values. This extension of the law of nonviolence in the domain of economics means nothing less than the introduction of moral values. I use the adjective moral as synonymous with spiritual, he said. What is interesting about the Gandhian model of economics is that in this ideology, exploitation is replaced by service, acquisitiveness by renunciation or minimalism, local by global, and self-regulation by centralization. The economic system, politically non-violent and democratic, should be cooperative and constructive instead of being exclusive, competitive, and militant, end quote. Gandhi eschewed reliance on luxurious and superfluous goods and their entertainment fetishism that provides no moral or intellectual succor and does not help with the development of character. This does not, however, preclude public utilities or large-scale plans, nor centralizing capital incentive public services for other needs, provided there is a measure of balance with small-scale, labor-intensive, decentralized, and village or rather community-based service portals that provide for the diverse needs of human beings and animals in a protected ecological environment. Perhaps the best articulation of Gandhian economics in the grand vision of the nation in the making was none other than C.J. Kumarappa, one of the trusted disciples of Gandhi, who was asked to carry out his economic ideas into practice, and in doing so, got ample opportunities of understanding firsthand Gandhi's point of view. Likewise, the Nobel laureate in economics and Bharat Ratna awardee, Amartya Sen, is even more strongly of a Tagorean view that actual physical growth and economic development that are intrinsically aligned to engendering welfare capabilities, but not GDP or GNP alone, are the measure of the quality of life, which encompasses respect for human rights and human dignity, along with advocacy, education, health, gender equity, ecological sensitivity, and activism or social engagement, all of which enable human and other sentient capabilities. Sen, of course, in turn, has been severely criticized by his rival Indian economists from Columbia and Yale universities, namely Jagdish Bhagwati and Arvind Panagaria, for, as it were, putting the cart before the horse, or being misled by what they call track 2 over track 1 model. Now, Sen is attributed in this debate as believing that the starting point for achieving the desired goal of eliminating poverty, illiteracy, failing health, and other deprivations must be an immediate massive attack on these ills of the society, which would bring about physical growth because the citizens that make up the workforce would be healthier and more literate, which in turn would feed back the campaign against the social condition of inequity and injustices inherent therein. It's the sort of argument that Bernie Sanders was making in his election campaigns in the US, which failed, of course. The adversarial duo, who too, like Sen, have been advisors to successive Indian governments on the virtues of the neo-economic turn, argue instead that it is track 1 reforms that provide the true starting point for any poor country. On the one hand, rapid growth empowers citizens through increased income with which they can purchase high-quality education and health in the marketplace. And on the other hand, it provides the government with ever-rising revenues to further enhance public expenditure on health and education. This is a neoliberal view that people like Trump represent in the US. Sen is unrepentant, arguing that no amount of huge economic reform and growth measured in terms of GNP and GDP would be, he would say that they would be insufficient where a nation is lacking in substantive policies and commitment to achieve something worthwhile with short-term results of such progressive moves. He cites countries such as Brazil, not present day, but about a decade back, Mexico, Thailand, Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea, and China, where the state began with education and healthcare reforms right away without waiting for a citizen to become rich enough to buy education and healthcare. A practice, needless to say, that has brought the United States to a standstill over President Barack Obama's attempt to instate universal health-supported health care or something close to it, despite a crunchingly unprecedented debt crisis in the United States. Sen is adamant that the view that calls for an enlightened vision on the part of the government and national leaders is not new, rather that this was advocated by Kautilya in the Arthashastras, by the Buddhist emperor Ashoka and the Mughal ruler Akbar, and indeed by Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations, underscoring essentially the importance of growth to human capabilities, which makes a difference to the kind of life one leads, but also enhances one's capabilities to be a productive part of society, and not merely a dispensable log in the wheel of the modern times. And it is, as you see with the COVID crisis, the wheels fall off, and with the wheels fall off the people who are pushing those wheels. Do I have another minute or?
No, that's it. I'm so sorry. I'm terribly sorry.
Okay, that's fine. If I can just write out one last paragraph. This is my conclusion. And on conversational suggestion, I wish to canvas in the concluding this essay is whether in all possible worlds there could be an economic system where there are no sellers and no buyers, but rather only givers and receivers, no market or store managers and customers or clients, but atithis, guests and gifting welfarers. And we would have been served very well in this crisis if that had been the situation. The worth and value of the flourishing of the community at the end of the day is here measured qualitatively in terms of how much one and all are able to give or gift, thus lessening the burden of karma as of state taxes and poll taxes, where beholding a glowing happiness in the face of the infinite other is our goal. Well, thank you. Sorry, went over time a bit.
Oh, that's quite right. It was such a fascinating talk. It was so thoroughly interesting. And thank you so much for the time you took to give it. It was very nice to listen to your wide-ranging talk, according to Max Weber and Marx, and at the same time, explored so much, including the spiritual tradition. So thank you so much for such a rich talk, Professor Bilimoria. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I found it very fascinating indeed. So thank you so much.
Sure, I'd be happy to make the full text available. I'd be very happy to.
Thank you. I look forward to reading it.